So we're getting into the Yuji versus Higuruma fight here because we saw at the end of the previous episode that Higuruma had activated his domain expansion, which sent them into like a courtroom where Yuji is forced into like this trial. And as Yuji like tries to hit him, he can't, because like one of the aspects of the domain is that violence can't be committed essentially, and that you have to go through this trial. Now this is pretty interesting because we haven't really seen a domain like this before, and we actually get like this quick refresher course on how domains work throughout history from Tengen in this episode, where Tengen explains that using domain expansions in general was like more of a common thing in the past, like Sukuna's time, maybe even a little after that too. We don't really see it too much nowadays because it's just become more of a complex skill to use because of the modern meta, I guess you could say, of domain expansion are all kind of chasing after what Gojo is more or less doing with his domain expansion, like the instant kill, and that's such a complex thing to do that not as many sorcerers are able to construct domain expansions nowadays. However, with Higuruma, when his technique was awakened, it automatically came with the domain expansion. So he didn't like have to make it or craft it or anything like a sorcerer normally would have to. He does have like a sure hit to it, which isn't like a literal hit, but more so just locking you into the rules of the domain itself. No violence can be committed. You're explained the rules of what's going on, and you have to go through the trial. We also find out that Higuruma is like a straight up genius through and through. It turns out that his full potential of being a genius comes out through sorcery. So Kenjaku rewiring him to become a sorcerer later in life was great because, you know, he picked the best candidate for it essentially because he understands things instantly, and like within 12 days he became just as strong and capable as like a grade 1 sorcerer. So him being this skilled this fast isn't that far-fetched. Now also, this is just in general an extremely powerful domain expansion. That doesn't mean that it can't be beaten. In theory, like Gojo explains, you know, earlier on in the series when he's going against Jogo, you could just use your own domain expansion to like clash with it or overpower it, or you can use like simple domain or your own jujitsu to fight against it in general. But Yuji is not that strong, especially in relation to Higuruma. He doesn't have his own domain expansion, and he doesn't have simple domain, which is like the generic form of defending yourself against a domain expansion. So he's particularly screwed here. And not only him, but also pretty much everyone else that Higuruma fought before this, because it actually says that Higuruma had defeated 20 other sorcerers or more than 20 before this, and it was in self-defense, of course. So he, I don't know, in theory went through this like 20 times, had like 20 separate trials, and then just killed all of them from the verdict of it. But I guess maybe he took down some of them without having to go into the domain expansion, because as we see, the gavel itself is like his base curse technique, I guess, like gavel manipulation, which is pretty cool. Like he can make it teleport and change in size and length, and he's a pretty good fighter with it too. I actually really like his fighting style with this. It's different. I mean, it's basically just a big mallet, but you know. But anyway, the first round of the trial here is accusing Yuji of going into a gambling pachinko parlor underage, and Yuji tries to lie saying that he had to use the bathroom, but Judge Man somehow knows everything about the people in the domain. And you would think, oh well, it just reads their memories or something, and I guess partly that is true, but it also is able to get like security footage from a shop across the street that sees Yuji going to like the cash exchange part of the pachinko parlor, which means that he was going to play. So Yuji was lying, of course. And as for how Judge Man got the security tape footage or picture, it just does. It could just tap into the Akashic records of reality or something. It doesn't matter. But the verdict for Yuji being guilty here is confiscation, which normally would take away a sorcerer's curse technique. But since famously Yuji doesn't have a curse technique, it takes away instead his ability to use cursed energy, which is really cool actually, because it has like built-in contingencies for instances like this. So now they're taken out of the domain, and it's just time for Higuruma to beat him down. And since Yuji can't use his cursed energy, he's just reliant on his base abilities. And Higuruma, of course, is surprised by how tough and resilient Yuji is without having cursed energy reinforcement, because normally a sorcerer would just, I guess in theory, just be like a regular person. But since Yuji was made to be a vessel for the Sukuna fingers by Kenjaku, he's like a superhuman, pretty much. I mean, he's not like full-blown heavenly restriction the way that Maki is, but he's, you know, somewhere in between like a regular person and heavenly restriction. So as Yuji's getting beaten down here, he figures out that, oh, I could just have a retrial. And as soon as he says that, they instantly go back into the domain, which is Pretty cool. And the second trial that they go through is Judge Man accusing Yuji of mass murder back on Halloween in Shibuya. And this, of course, is in reference to when Sukuna had taken over his body in the previous season and did his domain expansion and, slaughtered tons of people with it. And Yuji just immediately pleads guilty to this. And he does this because he feels guilty for what Sukuna had did. And it's because he felt that he was too weak to control Sukuna from doing that. So he feels responsible. And he's always felt this way since that had happened. Because he's just so brazen about it, Judge Man instantly gives him the death penalty. And the death penalty within this ability gives Higuruma the Executioner's Sword. And this thing is literally the strongest thing in Jujutsu Kaisen. Forget about Gojo, forget about Sukuna. This is the strongest thing because it says without exception, it will kill anyone that it cuts. Anyone. Gojo, Sukuna, Tengen, Kenjaku, even if they all did the fusion dance and combined into the Jujutsu God, they would still be killed by this, or at least probably. But no other person or thing has an ability that is this utterly absolute. And this is really cool. The only drawback is that you have to manually cut somebody with this. So if Higuruma did have this Executioner's Sword and he went against Gojo, he would never be able to cut him with it because, Gojo's just too strong in more ways than one. But you know what I mean? If somehow everybody held down Gojo or Sukuna and then Higuruma cut them, just even gave him a paper cut with this sword, they're just dead. So as Higuruma is going after Yuji with the sword, he's having this internal struggle and he's reliving memories. And this is happening for a few reasons, but mainly because he is actually given knowledge of what is inside of the evidence envelope that Judge Man provides in the trial. And because of this, he knows that it wasn't Yuji that committed that mass murder. He knows that it was Sukuna that took over his body. And he's just angry and confused and frustrated as to why Yuji would admit to this. And then Yuji explains to him, it's hey, I felt responsible for it because I was too weak to stop it. And Higuruma, being the good guy that he is, just lets the sword go and lets Yuji hit him. Then he realizes, Yuji, you're not such a bad guy after all, and he decides to give him his points. It's also at this point that Higuruma does reveal that he killed the judge and the prosecutor in the previous episode's flashback. So yeah, he feels guilty for that as well. So after the end credits, we see that the rule that Yuji and Megumi wanted to make is now implemented into the Culling game via using Higuruma's 100 points. So now they can trade points in between each other. And this is mainly so that they could trade their points to Megumi's sister, Sumiki, so she doesn't have to worry about dying from the rule about your points need to alter or whatever every 19 days or so, or you're gonna get cursed technique removal, which just means death. So that means that now they have more time, they don't have to worry about that, and that they can get more points to implement a rule to get Sumiki out of the Culling game. Then Yuji asks Higuruma to stick around and help them out, but Higuruma feels guilty about killing the judge and the prosecutor, and he needs time to think about things, but he'll be back. He's just way too cool and too powerful for this just to be the end of his character. But let me know what you thought about this episode in the comments, guys. If you liked it, please give it a like and please subscribe if you haven't already. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.